The phone rang at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in February. I remember the exact time because I'd just put my reading glasses down on the nightstand and reached over to turn off the lamp. 43 years of nursing taught me that nothing good ever calls after 11. I picked up on the second ring, and the voice on the other end was so quiet, I almost missed it. "Mom, I need you. I don't know who else to call." It was my daughter-in-law, and she was crying so hard she could barely get the words out. I was already pulling my boots on over my pajamas before she finished her second sentence. "Where are you, honey? Tell me where you are right now. Mile marker 41, the old Sycamore Road. I think I'm going to lose the baby. I think someone tried to." She stopped. The line crackled. I heard her gasp like she couldn't get air. "Please don't tell anybody. Please come alone." That last part should have stopped me cold. A girl 7 months pregnant, bleeding on the side of a country road in the middle of winter, telling me not to call an ambulance. But I'd known that girl since she was 19 years old, and I knew she didn't say things lightly. So I grabbed my coat, my medical bag from the hall closet, 2 wool blankets, and the keys to my old Bronco. I left a note for my husband saying I'd be back. Didn't say where. The roads were sheets of black ice. I drove like a woman half my age, and I am 63. My husband Walter and I have lived in the same county in East Tennessee for 41 years, raised both our boys in the same farmhouse my father built in 1957. I know every back road and every shortcut, and I made it to mile marker 41 in 19 minutes flat. I almost drove past her. She was off the shoulder, down in a shallow gully, her little white sedan tilted sideways against a fence post. The front end was crumpled. The driver's side door was hanging open, and there, in the ditch about 10 feet from the car, was my son's wife, curled up on her side in the snow, one hand pressed against her belly. I half slid, half ran down that embankment, and when I got to her and saw her face in the flashlight, my knees almost went out from under me. There was blood on her mouth, bruising up the side of her jaw. Her left wrist was bent at an angle. Wrists are not supposed to go. "Sweetheart, sweetheart, look at me. It's me. It's your mother-in-law. I'm here." Her eyes opened. They tried to focus. "Don't take me home," she whispered. "Please, don't take me to my house. He'll be there. Who will be there, honey?" She closed her eyes again. A tear ran sideways across her temple and into her hair. "My father, my own daddy, did this to me. I'm going to tell you something now, and I want you to understand it the way I understood it in that moment, kneeling in the snow with a flashlight in my mouth and my hands pressed against a woman young enough to be my daughter, who had just told me that her father had run her car off the road on purpose. I understood that whatever I thought I knew about this family was wrong. And I understood that if I called an ambulance, the people who hurt her would know exactly where she was inside of 20 minutes, because in a county this size, the dispatchers go to church with everybody. So I did what 43 years of nursing told me to do. I splinted her wrist with a tire iron and a strip of blanket. I checked her pupils. I felt for the baby's movement, and I felt it kick, weak but there, thank God. I wrapped her in both wool blankets, carried her up the bank in pieces, and laid her flat in the back of the Bronco. I did not drive her home. I drove her to my farmhouse, and on the way, with one hand on the wheel and one hand reaching back to keep pressure on her wrist, I called my older sister. My sister is 67 years old, and she retired 3 years ago from 28 years as a deputy sheriff in this same county. She picked up on the first ring, the way she always does, like she sleeps with her phone in her hand. "It's me," I said. "It started. It's the thing we talked about last summer." There was a long pause on her end. Then she said, "I'll be at the back door in 40 minutes. Don't open the front for anybody." That was all she needed to know. Now I have to back up, because if I don't, none of what comes next will make any sense. My son and his wife had been married almost 5 years. We loved her from the first Sunday he brought her to dinner. She was 23 then, working as a kindergarten teacher in the next county over, and she had this quiet, watchful way about her that I recognized immediately, because I had seen it in girls at the hospital, in girls in church basements, in girls in line at the grocery store. She had grown up with somebody who hurt her, and she was good at being small. Her father owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states. Old money built on top of newer money, the kind of man who showed up to Christmas dinner at our house wearing a watch that cost more than my husband's truck, who made jokes that weren't jokes, who corrected his daughter's grammar in front of company. The first time I met him, he told me my pot roast was passable considering. I smiled at him and put a second helping on his plate because I was raised right and I waited. My son adored him. That was the part that broke my heart for a long time. My boy is a software engineer. Smart, gentle, soft-spoken, easily impressed. His father-in-law took an interest in him from the start. Took him golfing, introduced him to people, eventually convinced him to put money, our family's money my husband and I had loaned the boy to start a business with, into one of his investment opportunities. That was 3 years ago. The business never started. The money disappeared. And my son, who was too proud and too ashamed to tell us what had happened, ended up owing his father-in-law nearly $200,000 on paper. I didn't know any of this. Not at first. I knew something was wrong because mothers know. I knew my daughter-in-law had lost weight. She didn't have to lose. I knew she'd stopped coming to Sunday dinner with the excuse of headaches. I knew that when she did come, she watched her husband's face for cues before she answered any question I asked her. But I didn't know the why, not until the previous July. In July, my daughter-in-law called me from the parking lot of a Walgreens 2 towns over. She had been to a doctor under a fake name and paid in cash. She told me she was pregnant, 8 weeks, and she told me she had not told her husband, and she did not plan to. I asked her why, and she said, and I will never forget this as long as I live. She said, because I don't think my father will let me keep it. I drove over there that afternoon. I sat with her in a Cracker Barrel for 3 hours, and she told me everything. The lost business, the debt, the way her father had been managing their finances since the day they got married in exchange for giving portions of what my son owed. The way he had told her, when she'd suggested starting a family 2 years earlier, that a baby was not in the budget until certain conditions were met. The way her own mother, who had died of cancer when my daughter-in-law was 16, had once told her that the safest place a daughter could be was far away from her father. There was a trust. That was the part I hadn't known. Her maternal grandfather on her mother's side had left a trust of just under $1.5 million to be released to my daughter-in-law upon the birth of her first child, or upon her 35th birthday, whichever came first. Her father was the trustee until release. Her father had been borrowing against that trust for 15 years for his businesses, for his lifestyle, for the watch and the cars and the lake house. And when the trust released, the books would be opened and a forensic accountant would be able to see in black and white what he had done. She was 27. She had 8 years before the trust released on her birthday, but a baby would release it inside of 9 months. I sat across from that girl in a Cracker Barrel booth and I watched her hands shake while she told me all of this. And I made her a promise. I said, "Sweetheart, you are going to have this baby. And nobody, not your father and not my son and not anybody, is going to take that from you. I will tell you exactly when to tell people you're pregnant, and we are going to be ready for what comes next." That was July. My sister and I started planning that August. We told my daughter-in-law to announce the pregnancy at the end of her first trimester and to act surprised when she did. We told her to keep all her doctor's appointments at the clinic 2 counties over in cash under her maiden name. We told her to start documenting phone calls, texts, anything her father said, anything that felt wrong. My sister, with her old badge connections, started quietly pulling the public records on her father's businesses, the LLCs, the property transfers. We waited, and then, on a Tuesday night in February, almost exactly 7 months later, the phone rang at 11:37. When I got her home, I laid her down on the daybed in my sewing room, and I worked on her by lamplight, the way my own mother taught me to work on people during the ice storm of '78, when the doctor couldn't get up the mountain. I set her wrist. I cleaned the cuts on her face. I started an IV with a bag I had no business having in my house, except that I do have business because I worked the labor and delivery ward at our county hospital for 31 years before I moved over to home health, and old nurses do not throw things away. I monitored the baby's heart rate with a fetal Doppler I had borrowed from a friend at the clinic 2 weeks earlier because we had been getting ready and I had a feeling something was coming. The baby's heart rate was 142. Steady. Strong. I cried then, just for a minute, with my hand on that girl's belly, and I told her, "He's all right. He's all right, honey. He's still in there fighting." She opened her eyes. "It's a he." I hadn't meant to say that. The ultrasound paper she had given me to keep at my house 3 weeks earlier had it written right at the top, but she had never opened the envelope. She said she was saving it for after. Saving it for when she was safe. "It's a boy," I said. "I'm sorry. I should have let you find out." She laughed. It was a terrible, broken little laugh, but it was a laugh. "I'm glad you told me. I want to know him before whatever happens next." My sister came through the back door at 1:34 in the morning. She was carrying a duffel bag, a thermos of coffee, and a manila folder 2 inches thick. She kissed my daughter-in-law on the forehead, took one look at her wrist, and said, "Honey, you tell me everything you remember. Start at dinner." My daughter-in-law told us everything. Her father had come over for dinner that evening, uninvited. My son had let him in. Her father had brought a bottle of wine, which he opened himself in the kitchen and poured a glass for her, which he insisted she drink because it was a special occasion, he said, because he wanted to toast his future grandchild. She had taken 1 sip, maybe 2. By the time dessert was on the table, her head was swimming and her vision was doubling, and she had excused herself to lie down. Her father had told my son in front of her that she should not be driving in her condition. Her father had said he would take her home in the morning, but she had heard him in the hallway, on the phone, while she lay on the guest bed with her eyes closed. She had heard him say to somebody, "It'll look like she lost control. The roads are bad enough tonight." And she had understood, with the clarity that comes only to people whose bodies are already half set down, that she had to get out of that house. She had taken her own keys off the kitchen hook. She had walked out the front door barefoot in her coat while her father was in the bathroom and her husband was in the basement. She had driven 6 miles down Sycamore Road before her vision went completely double and the car drifted off into the gully. She did not remember hitting the fence post. She remembered crawling out of the car. She remembered the cold. She remembered praying. And she remembered, somehow, dialing my number with hands she couldn't feel. My sister wrote all of it down in a little notebook while she talked. When she was done, my sister closed the notebook and looked at me. "Your boy," she said. "He knew her father brought the wine. He watched her drink it." "He didn't know what was in it," I said. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. My daughter-in-law turned her face to the wall. "He knew about the first one," she said. I didn't understand. Neither of us did. My sister leaned forward. "The first what, sweetheart?" "The first pregnancy." Now I want you to listen to me carefully, because this is the part that I have to tell you exactly as she told it to us, in that sewing room at 2 in the morning, while the snow came down outside and my husband slept upstairs not knowing anything yet. There had been another pregnancy. 2 years earlier, she had told my son. My son had told her father because he told her father everything in those days, because her father had a way of getting it out of him, and her father had come over the next afternoon with a bottle of tonic that he said had helped his late wife with her morning sickness. He had insisted my daughter-in-law drink it. He had stood in her kitchen and watched her drink it. And 3 days later, she had lost that baby in a bathroom at school during her lunch break, alone, while her kindergarten class waited for her in the cafeteria. My son had cried with her. My son had held her. My son had also, 2 weeks later, accepted $40,000 from her father as a gift to help with their grief. She had found the deposit on the bank statement. She had never said a word. I sat there in my sewing room and I felt something inside my chest go cold and quiet. I have loved that boy his whole life. I rocked him through colic and ear infections. I taught him to read. I drove him to college and cried all the way home. And I understood, in that moment, that I did not know him anymore. Or maybe I had never known the version of him that her father had made. My sister was watching me. She has known me 63 years. She put her hand on my arm. "What do you want to do?" she said. It wasn't a question. I thought about it. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds. And then I told her, "I want him to come here," I said. "I want both of them to come here. And I want it to be on our terms." We worked through the rest of that night. My sister made calls, the kind of calls you can only make when you've been a deputy in a small county for 28 years. By dawn, she had a forensic accountant on standby, a friend at the state attorney's office willing to look at a file, and a hospital administrator one county over who agreed to admit my daughter-in-law under her maiden name and a privacy hold. We moved her to that hospital at 6:30 in the morning, in my Bronco, with my sister following behind in her truck. The doctor who examined her confirmed the baby was stable, confirmed the toxicology on the IV bad draw I had taken would be processed quietly, confirmed she had a hairline fracture in her wrist and 3 bruised ribs and a concussion, and confirmed she would need to be kept for 48 hours minimum. I drove home alone. The sun was coming up over the ridge. I made coffee. I called my husband down from the bedroom, sat him at the kitchen table, and told him everything. He's a quiet man. He listened all the way through. When I was done, he got up, walked to the gun cabinet, looked at it for a long minute, and then closed it again and came back to the table and put his hand over mine. "You tell me what you need me to do," he said. I told him. He nodded. Then I called my son. I told him his wife had been in an accident. I told him she was safe, but hurt, and that I was at home, and that he should come over right now. I told him not to bring anyone with him. He asked if he should call her father. I said, "No, honey, not yet. Just come." He was at my house in 40 minutes. My sister's truck was parked out back, hidden behind the barn. Her father's car arrived 20 minutes after my son did, because of course my son had called him anyway. Of course he had. I let her father in through the front door, and I poured him coffee, and I sat him down in my living room across from my son, and I said, "I have something to tell both of you." I told them she had been in an accident on Sycamore Road. I watched her father's face. He did very well. He looked concerned. He asked the right questions. He even let his eyes fill up a little. My son was crying openly by then, asking where she was, asking if the baby was okay. Her father put a hand on my son's shoulder and said all the right things. He was very, very good. I let him finish. Then I said, "She told me about the wine." The room went still. I said, "She told me about the tonic 2 years ago. And she told me what she overheard you say in the hallway last night, about how it would look like she lost control." Her father's face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. He stood up. He said, "I don't know what you think you heard, but my daughter has been emotionally unstable for a long time, and I'd advise you not to." That is when my sister came out of the kitchen. She had her old service piece on her hip, which she is licensed to carry, and she had the manila folder in her hand, and she had a smile on her face that I have not seen on her since 1982. She walked right past her father and sat down on the arm of my couch and opened the folder on the coffee table. "Take a seat," she said. He took a seat. What was in that folder was 12 years of paperwork, bank transfers from the trust to her father's holding companies, mortgages he had taken out on properties that legally weren't his, a signed statement from a notary in Knoxville who had been pressured to backdate a document in 2014, phone records, a photograph of the bottle of tonic from 2 years earlier, which my daughter-in-law had taken before she drank it because some part of her had known. And on top of all of it, the toxicology report from the IV draw, which had come back from a private lab my sister had a contact at, faxed to my house at 7:15 that morning. The wine had contained a benzodiazepine and a synthetic compound used to induce labor, enough of either one in the second trimester to cause a miscarriage. Together on country roads in February at night, enough to kill her. My sister slid that report across the coffee table toward my son. "Read it," she said. He read it. She wet it. I watched my boy's face while he read it. And I watched something break in him that I do not believe will ever heal all the way, and I am his mother, and I have made peace with that." He looked up at her father. He said very quietly, "You said it was for morning sickness." Her father did not answer. My son stood up. He walked over to where her father was sitting. He did not hit him. He didn't have it in him. But he looked down at that man and he said, "I am going to testify against you. I am going to testify against you. I am going to tell them everything I know. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the kind of man my wife thought I was when she married me." Her father was arrested at 4018 that afternoon at my kitchen table by a friend of my sister's from the state attorney's office. He was charged with aggravated assault, attempted murder of an unborn child, embezzlement, and 7 counts of financial fraud against the estate. The investigation is still ongoing as I tell you this. My son is cooperating fully. He has moved back into our farmhouse. He sleeps in his old room. He has not seen his wife since that morning, and he has not asked to. My daughter-in-law was discharged from the hospital after 6 days. We brought her home to our farmhouse, not to her own. My sister moved into the upstairs guest room with her. The two of them have become as close as I am with my own sister, which is to say, closer than blood. My husband converted the back parlor into a nursery. I painted the walls myself, a pale yellow like the color of the kitchen in my mother's house when I was a little girl. The baby was born on April 19th, 6 weeks early, but healthy, 6 pounds and 1 ounce, with a head full of dark hair and a cry like a fire alarm. We named him after my father, who built the house we brought him home to. He is 6 months old now. He sleeps in the room next to mine. My daughter-in-law sleeps across the hall. My sister sleeps downstairs, in what used to be my sewing room. My husband makes pancakes on Saturdays. There are 4 generations of women in this house, if you count the photograph of my mother on the mantelpiece, and we count her because she was the one who taught us the only thing about family that turned out to be true. She taught us that blood is not the same thing as belonging. She taught us that the people who love you are the ones who would drive 19 minutes on black ice at midnight with a medical bag and 2 wool blankets, no questions asked. She taught us that when a daughter, any daughter, by blood or by marriage, comes to you bleeding and afraid, you do not ask her to explain. You wrap her in your coat. You take her home. You pick up the phone. That is the only thing I have left to say. If you have a daughter in your life who has gone quiet, who has gotten smaller, who watches a man's face before she answers a simple question, you go to her. You don't wait. You don't second guess. You go. And if you've made it this far in my story, then thank you for listening. Thank you for sitting with me at this kitchen table for a little while. Take care of the people who would drive through the snow for you. They are the only family that ever mattered. I sit on the porch most evenings now with the baby asleep on my chest and the sun going down over the ridge, and I think about how thin the line was. 19 minutes on black ice. One phone call I almost missed because I'd already turned off the lamp. If Cassidy hadn't been able to dial my number with hands she couldn't feel, if I hadn't kept that medical bag in the hall closet, if my sister Della hadn't spent the previous summer pulling records nobody asked her to pull, that boy in my arms would not be breathing right now. Neither would his mother. I want you to understand something. Her father did not become what he was overnight. He built himself piece by piece over 40 years by learning that nobody would stop him. Every small cruelty he got away with taught him he could try a bigger one. The watch he bought with money that wasn't his. The grammar he corrected at my dinner table. The bottle of tonic 2 years ago. The wine in February. That is how it works, in my experience. People do not wake up one morning and decide to harm a pregnant girl on a country road. They arrive there one decision at a time, and every person around them who looked away and stayed quiet helped pave the road. My own son helped pave it. I have to say that out loud, because if I don't, I haven't really learned anything. Marcus loved that man more than he loved his own conscience for a while there, and the cost of that love was nearly his wife and his child. He is paying it back now, day by day. He chops wood in our yard. He drives Cassidy to her physical therapy appointments and sits in the waiting room and does not ask to come into the room. He has not earned his way back yet, and he may never, but he is trying, and trying is not nothing. What I want to leave you with is this. Decency is not a feeling. Decency is what you do at 11:47 on a Tuesday night when somebody calls you crying. Wisdom is knowing the July before that the call is coming and getting ready. And courage, real courage, the kind my mother had, the kind she tried to pour into me and Della before she passed. Courage is being willing to lose the people who share your blood in order to protect the people who need you. I lost a piece of my son that night. I will not pretend I didn't. But I would lose it again, 10 times over, to keep that baby safe. If you are listening to me tonight and there is a young woman in your life who has gone quiet, pay attention. Get ready. Do not wait until the phone rings. Some of us do not get the 19 minutes.